I never knew that leaving my house for a month would cause such anarchy. I would have laughed incredulously if someone had informed me last year that I would be evicting my own parents. Let's rewind a little here, in the middle of a mess I did not make but nonetheless feel guilty about. For me, last year has been a whirl. I was involved with my 10-year girlfriend, Sarah. Everything appeared ideal as we were organizing a summer wedding, until I discovered something that rocked my world. I'll not get into specifics, but it was something I couldn't pardon. My life plan fell apart within a week, and I left that relationship. The split left me in shreds. After 10 years of building our life together, suddenly I didn't know who I was outside of us. When summer arrived, the original wedding date, I couldn't face the idea of being in the city. After a month abroad, suitcases in hand and eager to re-enter my haven, I arrived back home, and clarity was the last thing waiting for me. I decided to flee to Michigan to lose myself in nature and find some peace. Rather, I discovered dirty dishes stacked in the sink, shoes strewn across the hallway, and someone's toiletries cluttering my bathroom. Anxiety crept in. Turns out it was my folks. I assumed someone had broken in. It wasn't someone. Mark and Linda, my parents, have always been somewhat passionate. We are not a rich family. Our rented property was where we grew up, and my parents worked hard to support my younger sister Julie as well as me. Over the years, they hinted, then straight demanded, that I buy them a house. Their mantra has always been, "We sacrificed everything for you, so you owe us." Their sacrifices came with strings attached, strings that tightened around me as soon as I started earning. Still, I was not in a position to do it. I reasoned that investing in a house for us initially would be wise when Sarah and I chose to be married. The news did not go well with my parents. When I bought the house 2 years ago, they couldn't hide their jealousy. They were obviously offended that I was not giving their dream of homeownership top priority. At first, I didn't take it seriously every time they visited remarks like, "I wish our house had a kitchen like this," or "This is the kind of ceiling I always dreamed of." Then things picked up speed. My parents were fast to comfort me after I split from Sarah. For a week, my mother even stayed with me, cooking food and functioning as my mental support system. First, it looked romantic, but then she bombshellily said, "You don't need all this space now that you're single." We were planning to move in, so I found what I was hearing unbelievable. She was looking at my property as though it were for sale, not offering any support. I instantly turned it off, telling her I needed time to recover and sort out my life. Still, it was not the end of things. Fast forward to my month-long trip to Michigan. They kept pushing, suggesting I should either let them occupy or locate a smaller location for myself so they might take over. I felt some time apart would enable me to get clear-headed. I never would have imagined returning to discover my parents had basically moved into my house without permission. I was angry and incredulous as I stood in my living room staring at their wedding portrait hanging in my bedroom. I got right on phoning my mother. She responded casually as if nothing was wrong, and mentioned we would talk in the evening. When she got home, she behaved as if this was natural. I tried to keep cool and asked why they would have switched off the security cameras. She hugged me, inquired about my trip, and then subtly mentioned that they moved in to take care of the house. She grinned and remarked, "Switching off was quite simple. We wanted not to disturb you on your vacation." Her bravado astounded me. When I asked they leave, my mom shrugged me off, claiming she was tired and we would discuss later. They had purposefully turned off my cameras so I wouldn't know about their intentions. She went into my bedroom, then closed the door behind her. She even had the nerve to say, "By the way, your dad likes this room, so we've shifted your stuff to the other one." When my dad came home later, he started berating me for being careless, enough to leave my house vulnerable to crooks. His tone was dripping with self-righteousness, as if they were doing me a favor by moving in. My mother stepped in with her typical guilt-tripping strategies, saying things like, "We've sacrificed so much for you." I pushed back, arguing they had no right to invade my space. Surely we are entitled to live comfortably once more, saying I couldn't handle it anymore, and I didn't need so much space now that I was single helped her to excuse it. I locked myself in the room where they had thrown my stuff and told them we would talk over the weekend. Though it couldn't arrive soon enough, when it came, I wasn't sure if I felt more ready or just emotionally exhausted. acting as though I was the visitor rather than my parents. They had been marching around the house like they owned it. It was quite frustrating. After years of hard labor to pay for this house, they were treating it as some sort of family heirloom they were entitled to. When Saturday arrived, I decided to have the chat. I tried to tackle the matter logically and set them down in the living room, my living room. I wanted no yelling or escalation of events. I wanted my house and my boundaries back. "I need to talk to you about this living arrangement," I said gently. My mom cut me off right away. "We've discussed this already. Right now you're single. You don't need all this room. If we stay here, what is the major deal? We are family. Mom, this is quite important. My house is here," she answered, folding her arms like a tenacious kid. "Well, we didn't think we needed to ask. You were not invited to move in. Our name is your parents. We grew you. We gave everything for you, and right now, we simply want to live comfortably. Is that quite incorrect?" That was the same classic song I had heard all my life. The guilt-tripping, the sacrifices, the story I owed them for just being their child. Years of swallowing that story were behind me, but this was too much. "I get that you made sacrifices," I said, trying to keep cool, "and I value all you have done for me, but that does not mean you are entitled to run my house. This is my place." Suddenly leaning forward and jabbing a finger at me, my dad, who had been silent up until now, said, "You're being selfish. All we are asking for is a roof over our heads. How many parents would kill in order to produce a son as successful as you? And here you are turning away from us. I found the boldness to be astounding. I am not turning my back on you. For years I have been lending you financial support. Though I have helped you in all respects, this is crossing a line. You moved in without asking questions. You disabled my cameras for security. You're treating my house as though it were yours." "You're making such a fuss over nothing," my mother shot out. "We are not total strangers. Our parents are you. Why are you so keen to drive us away? Here by yourself, you must be lonely." "That is not the idea," I snapped, my patience at last breaking. "This is not about family or loneliness. This is regarding respect. You hardly respected me enough to even ask whether you might stay here." They both stared at me like I had just slapped them. "You just grabbed what you wanted, and now you're behaving like I'm the bad guy for establishing limits." I momentarily considered perhaps, just maybe, that they were beginning to grasp. Then my mother's face stiffened and she let out a theatrical sigh. "You know, this attitude of yours is exactly why you're alone," she remarked, her voice dripping with contempt. That struck me like a truck. Why Sarah left you. At first, I found it impossible even to understand. "Excuse me?" The words just hung in the air, weighty and nasty. With shaky voice, I at last managed to respond. "You heard me," crossing her arms. "Maybe you would still have a fiancé if you were not so selfish and stubborn. But no, you pushed her away just as you are pushing us away." My dad interrupted. "She's right. You have to quit always obsessing about yourself. Family rules first. Sarah most likely desired that as well, but you were too busy following your own aspirations." I found what I was hearing unbelievable. One of the most agonizing events of my life, my breakup was being used as a weapon to guilt me into allowing them remain. Any empathy or understanding I had tried to summon for them disappeared in an instant. "You don't get to bring Sarah into this," I replied, my voice low but forceful. "She left not out of my but of her own decisions, and this would not change if she were still here. You are not welcome in my house." My dad got up, hot in the face from wrath. "You are throwing us off. That is what you're saying. You have to go," I said. "You cannot simply walk into my house and expect me to roll over and accept it. You are not listening when I try to speak to you gently." Indeed, my mother started crying. Loud, theatrical cries that tore across the room. "How could you treat us this way? Having all we have done for you? You are treating us like strangers off the street, as criminals. Is this what we are getting for your raise?" Years ago, her weeping could have helped me. However, not now. I completed it. Standing my ground, done with the manipulation, the guilt, and the entitlement, I responded, "I'm not treating you like criminals. I will not allow you to stroll all over me, though, either. My house is this. You have to go." The remainder of the weekend was a disaster. No matter how much I pleaded or argued, my parents would not leave. They behaved as though they were the victims, and I was some unappreciative monster not appreciating their offerings. It was draining. By Monday, I understood that communication would not be able to fix anything. I would have to act more severely if they were not ready to go on their own. Something I never considered I would have to do. However, I saw no alternative. My gut knitted into knots the instant I knew they would not be leaving voluntarily. This was a full-fledged standoff, not only a dispute now. Acting as though they had every right to remain in my house, they had dug their heels in, and I realized I had to go farther. Though it felt improper, almost nasty, what else could I do? Monday was spent investigating my alternatives. After hours of surfing legal advice websites, forums, and even some Reddit discussions, I decided to see a lawyer. I wanted to move, but not without knowing my rights. Calm and professional, David the attorney listened carefully as I described the circumstances. He stated straightforwardly, "You're well within your rights to ask them to leave," as I finished. Should they refuse, you can send an eviction notice. Though legally they are trespassing, considering that they are your parents, it is not ideal. Eviction really impacted me. I never imagined I would have to fire my own parents. It felt frigid, as though something strangers did to one another, not family. But the more I considered it, the more I saw it go beyond the house now. It concerned limitations, my limit, and they had crossed them in every conceivable manner. When I returned home that evening, my dad was laying on the sofa, remote in hand, as if he were settling in for the long run. Clattering dishes around like she was cooking a feast, my mom was in the kitchen. It was surreal, like they had totally disregarded every word we had. I watched them from the doorway and something inside me caught fire. Their house was not this one. "We need to talk," I said, my voice firm. My mom turned around, her face impassive, like she already knew what I was about to say. This was my sanctuary, my place, and they had seized it without a second thought. "Can it hold? Dinner is practically ready." "No, it can't wait," I said. "I've spoken with a lawyer." That caught their interest. My mom set down the spatula she had been holding while my dad turned down the TV. Both of them turned to me, their expressions a mixture of uncertainty and wariness. "A lawyer?" With an astonished tone, my dad said, "What the devil is for? Because you won't leave," I answered sharply. "I have a lovely request for you. I have discussed the reasons this isn't acceptable. Still, you are not paying attention. I am thus sending you an eviction notice." The jaw of my mother dropped. "An eviction notice? You are serious? Your folks are here right now. And here is my house," I continued, trying to keep my voice calm. "You have left me without options. I did not want it to get to this. You have 2 weeks to leave." The fallout happened right away. Once more, my mom began to cry. My dad burst in wrath. Rising, he pointed a finger at me like I was a rebellious youngster instead of a grown man in my own house. "You're tossing your own family out onto the street?" he shouted. "What sort of son does that? We brought you up for God's sake. We handed you all." I shot back, "You raised me because you wanted to. That was your decision, not mine, and I have supported you in every manner I could have. But too much is involved here." "You crossed a line." My mother, still in tears, interrupted. "Alex, we are not strangers here. You are your parents. You treat us like criminal offenders." My voice rising despite me, I added, "I'm not treating you like criminals, but you seem as though you own this place. You do not. I definitely do, and I want my space back." They turned away. The 2 weeks following were absolute paradise. They discovered fresh guilt trip techniques every day. Reminding me of all the times his 2 jobs paid for my schooling, my dad would start lectures on family loyalty. One night, my mother said, her voice shaking, "You don't know what it's like to sacrifice everything for someone." She would corner me with teary-eyed stories about how difficult it was to raise 2 kids on a shoestring budget. "But one day you will understand when you have children of your own. You will also regret treating us this way." I did not protest. Pointlessness was evident. Every discussion descended into the same guilt-ridden, manipulative self-pity circle. I started completely avoiding them, going late at work to cut the time I spent at home. Still, it was insufficient to get away from the ongoing stress. When the 2 weeks were over, I returned home to discover my parents still living there. Their packing had not included one box. I contacted David, my attorney, and let him know the circumstances. If anything, they seemed even more ingrained, like they were daring me to carry out on my threat. Should they refuse to go, he advised me I could file a formal eviction lawsuit. But he cautioned me it could get messy. "It's up to you," he said. "But if you want them out, you need to be ready for some blowback." I was ready, or so I thought. Nothing, though, could have readied me for what lay next. Among the toughest things I have ever done was filing the eviction notice. My hands were quivering even as I signed the paperwork at my attorney's office. These were my parents, folks I had grown up thinking I would never be able to say no. David reassured me the process was simple, but that didn't make it any simpler. I was drawing a line in the sand because they had left me no other option. My parents would have a legal need to leave the property within a specified period once the notification was formally delivered. Should they neglect, I could bring it to court. Though deep down I knew they wouldn't take this silently, I didn't want it to go that far. When I went home that evening, I discovered my parents in the kitchen conversing like any other evening. Her way of softening me, I doubt, was my dad reading a newspaper while my mom was stirring a pot of something that smelled suspiciously like one of my favorite childhood meals. I came in and set the eviction notice on the table. The room fell quiet. Mid-stir, my mother stopped. My dad lowered his newspaper slowly. Both of them fixated on the document as though it were an alien item incomprehensible to them. "What's this?" With a low, agitated voice, my dad finally questioned, "It's an eviction notice." I answered calmly, "You have 30 days to leave." My mother's face crumbled. "You are indeed serious." Her voice broke as she whispered, "You would truly do this to us?" "I asked you to get out weeks ago," I said. "You ignored me. The only alternative I have left is this." The explosion I had been waiting for arrived swiftly. Red with wrath, my dad got up. "You unappreciative little brat," he spat. "This is how you pay us for all we have done for you? Treating us as freebies, like rubbish?" I said, attempting to keep cool. "You're not garbage, but you are not honoring my limitations. I have given this house great effort. I need my space." "You're selfish," he yelled back, his voice rising. "Your own family is not as important to you as your damned limits. You reared us. For you we gave all up, and here is the thanks we are due." Still clutching the wooden spoon, my mom started to cry. "Alex, these are your parents. How could you be so ruthless? You hardly gave us any thought at all." The guilt was intolerable. Every syllable they uttered seemed to cut right to my chest. Still, I stayed put. I had gone backward for years to fulfill their needs, simplify their lives, be the ideal son, etc. Still, this had little to do with being a decent son anymore. This was about recovering my life. "You're my parents," I replied softly, "and I love you. That does not, however, provide you permission to occupy my house and seize control of my life. You won't be listening if I try to explain this to you. I thus have to act now." The boiling rage of my dad's hand on the table caused the eviction notice to flap. His voice faltering, he added, "You're going to regret this." "Mark my words, Alex," he said. "You'll come to see one day what a mistake you have made. By then it will be too late." My mother cleaned her eyes and cast me like a stranger. Her voice icy, she added, "Maybe we raised the wrong kind of son, one who only thinks about himself." The next few weeks were a horror. They put off beginning to pack. Rather, they turned even more toward their guilt-tripping strategies. Every evening my dad would corral me and yell about devotion and family values. Then they called in reinforcements. My mother would sit on the couch, sobbing and murmuring about how she had failed as a mother. One night, my sister Julie phoned me with a judgment-filled voice. "Alex, what the devil is wrong with you?" she snatched. "You are evicting Dad and Mom? You're crazy," already worn out from the conversation I knew was about to start. "You don't understand," I said. "They came into my residence without asking. They are not going to go. I tried approaching them, but they are not listening." "Our parents are here," she cried out. "You're treating them like strangers. They gave up everything to raise us. How can you be so callous?" "Julie, when was the last time you paid them a visit?" I recoil. "When have you lately assisted them with anything? She hated it when you lectured me about responsibility while you hardly participated in their life." "You're amazing," she remarked. "One day you will come to regret this. Just wait." Julie was not alone. Too, my parents hauled other family members into the situation. One evening, unannounced, my uncle showed up at my door carrying a bottle of whiskey and a lecture ready to go. "Alex, family is everything," he said, seated on my couch like he owned the house. "You do not turn away the ones who reared you. To provide you a decent existence, your parents worked their ass off. Let them stay here, the least you can do." "I'm not turning my back on them," I responded, my patience running thin. "I have been helping them for many years, but right here is my house. They are your parents, hence they have no right to move in without asking." He replied, as if that were the last card in hand. "You owe them. I don't owe them my life," I said. "I am free to have limits." The house was intolerable by the time the eviction date arrived. They, not me, could not respect that. Still there, still refusing to go, were my parents. Though the idea made my tummy turn over, I knew what I had to do next. Though they were not giving me any other choice, I did not want to let things become much more escalated. The deadline passed and then returned. Not one box had been packed by my parents, and they seemed not to be leaving. They behaved as though the eviction notice was only a piece of paper rather than a legal document. The stress was intolerable, as I found myself caught in this dreamlike state whereby my own house no longer seemed like mine. They would gaze coldly, accusingly, every time I entered a room as if I were some sort of evil. Under his breath, my dad would whisper loud enough for me to hear, berating me as selfish or unappreciative. Dramatic sighing from my mother would indicate that she felt the weight of the world was crushing her on the couch. They were digging deeper, attempting to wear me down, not only discounting the eviction notice. I started to doubt everything. Was I overly critical? Was I a poor son for handling things so far? Though every time I thought about backing down, I reminded myself of why I had first sent the eviction notice. The guilt was eating at me. This covered more than just the house. It was about standing up for myself, for my right to live my life free from their entitlement. I contacted David once again 1 week after the date. He guided me through the next actions, that of submitting for a court-ordered eviction. Though there was no other alternative, the idea of attending court against my own parents made me ill to my gut. They were not leaving voluntarily, and I could not continue to live like this. All hell erupted when the court documents arrived. Wandering into my room, my dad waved the papers as though they were some sort of personal betrayal. His voice was so loud it reverberated throughout the house. His face was flushed with wrath. "Court papers!" he shouted. "You are taking us right now to court? Have you totally lost your sense?" I said, trying to keep cool. "I didn't want it to come to this. But you aren't leaving. You have disregarded me. I have given you every opportunity to depart on your own, and this is ludicrous," he yells. "You are your parents. You bring not your own parents before court. What's incorrect with you?" "What goes wrong with me?" I snapped, my tolerance at last cracking. "What is wrong with you? You entered my house without asking, turned away when I asked politely, and now you are behaving as though I am the bad guy for defending myself. You crossed every boundary and you don't even care." My mother joined in, her voice shaking with tears and fury. "For you, Alex, we did everything, and this is your repayment method to us? When you treat us like criminals? By taking us to court as though we are strangers?" "You treat me like a stranger," I shot back. "You never asked to move in. You gave no thought to my limitations. For years, you have been controlling me by means of guilt-based coercion toward your own goals. I'm done." Among the toughest days of my life were those preceding the court hearing. To have me drop the matter, my parents used every strategy in the book. My dad alternated between explosive wrath and quiet. My mother sobbed non-stop. Occasionally, she was so loud that I had to leave the house for some quiet. One afternoon, I arrived home to discover a note on my door. They even sought to turn the neighbors against me, telling them some twisted version of the event whereby I was the villain and they were the victims. "Mrs. Klein, A woman who had spent decades living on the street was one of the neighbors. It said, "Alex, family is everything. I'm not sure the whole story here. Allow pride to not destroy what you have. Your parents adore you." I angrily and frustratedly crushed the note in my hand. Their knowledge was lacking the whole picture. Living under continual pressure and having your own family intrude on your life and treat your house like their property was unknown to them. It was survival, not pride. My parents were more demoralized than I had ever seen them on the day of the court hearing. My dad looked stern and resigned. My mother did not meet my gaze. They hardly even attempted to oppose the eviction. They simply sat there in quiet while the court decided in my favor. My mother spoke at last when it was over. She whispered softly, "You've won," her voice cracking. "Are you content right now?" It had less to do with winning, never was it. I did not, however, mention that. My parents started packing when we arrived home. I just stood there, feeling the weight of everything we had lost, not only the house, but also the love we had once enjoyed. I tried to chat with them, but they avoided me. Every inch of the home was covered in a weighty, stifling quiet. They left at the end of the week. I expected I would be relieved, but I felt only numb. Though it seemed less like home now, the house was at last mine once more. It felt like a battlefield, a space bursting with too many painful memories. Every room brought back the debates, the guilt, the manipulation. I began wondering whether I should sell it and begin over elsewhere. The house was quiet in a way it hadn't been in months the day my parents left. Their voices, presence, even their guilt-tripping all vanished. You would think I would have some sort of triumph, that I would have recovered something taken from me. Rather, I simply lounged on the couch and fixed my gaze on the blank walls. Though not in a reassuring sense, the house seemed larger. It felt hollow, still, too quiet. Everything felt strange even as I tried to go about my usual schedule. The kitchen still smelled mildly of my mother's cooking. Opening a drawer, I discovered something she had moved. The home itself still had been altered to suit her. I considered selling the house, but every time I looked at ads online or drove by a realtor's office, I hesitated. The bedroom, where their wedding portrait had hung on the wall, now had a faint imprint, like even the paint was unwilling to let them go. Like the house had triumphed. It seemed like acknowledging loss. I had battled so much to recover it, and now that it was once more mine, I could not simply turn away. Can I? A few weeks from their departure, Julie texted me. Since the court case, I hadn't heard from her. I had assumed she would write me off totally. But her message surprised me. "Hey, Alex, is it possible for us to chat? Though I know things have been tough, I would like to know your side." I looked suspiciously at my phone. It did not sound like Julie. At least, not the Julie I knew. Still, I thought I owed her a discussion. Perhaps she merely wanted another chance to guilt-trip me. Or perhaps she truly wanted to know. Either way, I was done fleeing this. A few days later, we met in a coffee shop. She appeared worn out, her typically polished look slightly disjointed around the margins. She started the conversation, not with a lecture, for the first time. Rather, she simply sat across from me and waited for me to talk. "So," I started, breaking the quiet, "what would you like information on?" She hesitated, then let out a sigh. "Alex, I find it difficult. I understand Mom and Dad could be trying, but was it truly that severe that you needed to bring them before court? They are our parents." I inhaled deeply, searching for the appropriate words. "Julie, you missed there. You never really understood what it was like or how they totally seized my life. They sought to make my house theirs, not merely move into here. Every time I tried to stand up for myself, they shamed me into backing down. But they've done so much for us," her voice softer now. "Do you not feel as though we owe them something?" "That's the issue," I remarked. "I have felt all my life that I owe them everything. And Julie, I have also tried. I have handed them money. Where I could, I have assisted them. Still, it was never sufficient. They constantly yearned more. More money, more control, more of me. I had to draw a line at some point." She was quiet for a little, stirring her coffee and fixating on the table. At last, she turned to face me. "I didn't know it was that bad," she said. "I suppose I simply assumed their complaints about you were hyperbole." However, you may be correct. Her comments were a little solace, like a weight I had no idea I had been carrying had been released. Maybe they do take it too far. Following that conversation, things with Julie started to get better. Someone in my family was first recognizing my side of the story. She stopped lecturing me and began listening instead. We were not suddenly best buddies or anything. Oh, and they did try. She even helped mediate a few heated events where my parents tried to reach out. About a month following their move-out, the first call arrived. The name of my mother flashed on my phone screen, and for a moment I thought about leaving it on voicemail, but perhaps stubbornness or curiosity got the better of me. "Hello? Alex," my mother began, her voice kind and wary. I answered. My voice was cautious. "I know that things have been challenging for us both. I wanted to add, nonetheless, I apologize. For everything. I have no words. She had never before apologized for anything, hence this caught me totally off balance." She continued, though. "We just didn't know what to do," before I could reply. "We believed you needed us after your divorce. We considered ourselves as being helpful," I said again, my voice stern. "Mom, you, without asking, moved into my house. You cut off my security cameras. You tried to control my life." "I know," she responded hurriedly, her voice breaking. "I am aware of our mistakes, but we had no intention of hurting you. We had no idea how to let go." That struck more strongly than I had anticipated. My parents were not hostile, despite all their shortcomings. They were merely defective people, not knowing how to negotiate the bounds of maturity, mine or theirs. It helped me to comprehend their behavior, but it did not justify it. "I appreciate the apology," I murmured at last. "To reestablish trust, though, will take time. You have to respect my space if you actually want things corrected. That begins with me not expecting anything. Not money, not favors, nothing. You are able to do that?" There was a long stop, and for a second I thought she might argue. She sighed then, though. "We'll try," she said. "I promise. The resolution wasn't perfect." I still had a lot of bitterness to sort through. My parents still had their times. Though the house still didn't seem like home, it felt for the first time in a long time that things might really get better. Every squeak in the flooring and every shadow in the corridor brought back the anarchy I had recently experienced. Selling it began to feel more like a chance for a fresh start than as though it was a sign of weakness. Though it was not a simple choice, selling the house felt right. Though I had battled so hard to recover my space, the house still felt contaminated by all the strife, guilt, and manipulation, even with my parents gone. Now it was no more a house. It served as a reminder of all I had gone through. Once I decided, I began acting according to plan. I got a real estate agent, cleaned the house, and started packing my stuff. Some of it made me nostalgic as I went through my stuff. Pictures with Sarah, souvenirs from travels we had gone together, and even some old family artifacts my parents had left behind caught my attention years ago. Other objects simply felt weighty, as though they bore the emotional weight of all I had been attempting to let go of. I packed the family stuff and ended up giving most of Sarah's belongings. Though not just now, maybe one day I would want for them. Not during my attempt at starting over. The house sold more quickly than I had anticipated. In a sought-after area, this was a fantastic house. Within weeks, I received many bids. Relieved, depressed, and with a flutter of hope, I signed the paperwork to complete the transaction and experienced an odd mix of feelings. This went beyond merely marketing a house. Julie came over the night before I moved out, ending a chapter of my life and clearing space for something fresh. Ever since our conversation at the coffee shop, she has been shockingly helpful. I believe she sensed how much I needed someone in my corner. "This is it, huh?" Looking around the almost empty living room, she answered, "Yeah." Then I leaned against the kitchen counter. "It's time." She nodded, then hesitated. "Alex, I understand this now. I actually do. After learning everything and witnessing how much this has impacted you, I used to think you were overreacting. I understand. You needed this." "Thanks," I responded softly. "That means a lot." We sat in quiet for some time. the weight of all that had happened hovering between us. She then laughed slightly, defying the tension. "Where then are you planning to travel?" "Somewhere peaceful and drama-free, I hoped." I grinned. "That is our strategy. I am looking at a location somewhat outside the city. Smaller, less complicated. Moving day arrived fast, something that really seems like mine." I went one more walk around the house while the last box was being loaded into the moving truck. Now it seemed different, emptier, definitely, but also lighter. The echoes of the past grew less strong. My new residence was unlike the old one. I stopped in the entryway for a moment, allowing myself to feel everything one final time before closing the door behind me. It was smaller, cozier, and hidden in a quiet neighborhood where I knew no one. That was just what I required. I felt like I could breathe for the first time in years. The first night I sat on the floor of my living room, surrounded by unpacked boxes, and simply sank. Not noise, not drama, nor suspense, just myself and the silence. It was quiet in a manner I hadn't felt in a long time. I began to rebuild over the following few months. Not just where I live, but also my life. To help me through all that had happened, I got back in touch with old friends, picked up interests I had given up, and even began visiting a therapist. Though it was difficult, it was worth it. My relationship with my parents stayed cold but civil. Mostly, my mother maintained her word. She still had her times when she would subtly guilt trip or mention everything they'd done for me, but I learned to keep to limits and set them. Though my dad was quieter and more subdued, I believe deep down he knew why I had done what I had done. Julie and I got closer as well. She stopped arguing sides and began to act more like a sister than she had ever done. She even paid me a couple visits to my new location, bringing dinner and assisting in decor. Though it wasn't flawless, looking back today, I'm not regretful of having stood up for myself. Though it was among the worst things I've ever done, it was also absolutely vital. I nearly crumbled under years of letting obligation and guilt control my life. But recovering my space, my house, my life, taught me a valuable lesson. Limits are not selfish. They are absolutely vital. I'm not sure whether my parents and I will ever totally mend our connection. Too much history and too many scars abound. For now, though, I am content with where things are. The distance is good for me. I'm okay with at last living my life for me. And truthfully, that feels rather decent.